How's it going, Raiders? My name is Ryan, and this is TRC episode 26. On today's episode, we are going to be talking Warriors and BFA. With that being said, tanks, everyone's ready. Pull timer on you.
The heroes have made it to the glorious finale.
Alright, here we go, guys. Set up your chairs, focus up, let's do this. Alright, guys, get buffed up.
Okay, so we want to soak the annihilations.
Get your shit together.
Then we want to target the annihilator.
Put the big girl panties on.
Move back to avoid damage from eradication.
I think I've disconnected.
Then we target decimator.
Can we pull already?
Then we target boss.
I hope you can swim in molten lava.
Let's kill this dragon.
Welcome back, Raiders. As I've already said, my name is Ryan, and this is the Raiders Confessional podcast where we talk all things in-game PvE content in the world of Azeroth. Unfortunately, not joining us today is one Martin Larson from the land of Denmark. Actually, this was my fault, not his. I had to be out of town for today, and I came in late, and as for the time difference, he was unable to be here, but he will be here next week with the next episode. That being said, though, joining me, as always, from the land of Canada is our friend Oreo, as you guys can see on the screen for those of you watching the video version. Oreo, how's it going, my friend?
Pretty good. I haven't been really up to a lot of World of Warcraft this week. It's been pretty busy summer, so.
Yeah? I just can't imagine you being busy with anything other than video games, so I'm just kind of waiting to hear this lie that's about to come out of your mouth.
Other than recruiting for us, I haven't really done a whole lot.
Yeah?
We stepped into normal mode on Antorus. That was fun.
Yeah.
We'll say it was fun.
Yeah, it was, it was what it was. Raiding just right now, Legion, is tough, man. It's like, even when I'm on a character that's kind of new and needs gear, it's still just kind of like, been here, done this a lot. I'm ready for BFA, and I'm sure you are too.
Oh yeah, I'm ready to move along.
For sure. For those of you that might be joining us for the first time, or new, or just so happen to have missed what is going on with those of us here on the TRC, Oreo and myself have decided going into BFA, instead of hopping guilds trying to find what we want, we are going to create what we want, and we have formed a TRC Mythic guild on Thrall Horde side. Yep, in a server. So we are building our roster out, and I think as of today, we had 20 people on the spreadsheet, and we are still looking for more. Obviously, we will adjust accordingly as people come and go, or we see what works, what doesn't work, and we're going to aim for that cutting edge achievement with each tier. So if any of you guys are interested, come on over. If you just want to hang out, be casual in the guild, that's fine too. We've got a lot of our personal friends are doing that. Just let us know. We'll include the links in the show notes. So yeah, but BFA, let's talk some beta. They have recently, with the last Q&A, they made the wild accusation that the large class changes are going to be done until we hit our first big patch inside of live BFA. But there was a caveat. And I think they did this to cover their own ass, because they can't say that no large changes will happen, because the truth is, if they tweak numbers on some classes, that could equal large rotational changes within that class, correct?
Yeah, I think we've seen examples of that with enhancement shamans. Pretty much as soon as Blizzard came out saying that they weren't going to do any more changes, pretty much just expect number tuning from now on. Pretty sure the Discord for shamans pretty much just deleted the entire enhancement side of it. They were pretty upset by that. But then we also saw that the very next change, they pretty much doubled the damage on most of the core rotational spells for shamans. So, they give and they take, I guess.
Well, and I kind of wanted to bring this up, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, because With the exception of Shadow Priest right now, which, no offense, rest in peace, Shadow Priest, they are not looking good at the moment. Hopefully, they will get some tuning changes before BFA drops. But um, I always tell people, like, find the class that you find fun to play, rotationally speaking, and just be patient, because they're likely going to tune them damage wise, so that if for nothing else, they do fall within the range of top to bottom. That way there's not this huge outlier where, hypothetically speaking, there's an 8k difference between the top damage and the lowest damage, and then all of a sudden you have some classes like 15k below that. We have seen that in past expansions, but with Legion, other than, what was it, Survival Hunter at times, and uh, Demo Locks later in the expansion, almost every class, every spec fell into a comparable range, so to speak. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I just find that it's kind of funny that you mentioned survival hunters, because I think anybody who has played a survival hunter has been waiting to be at least relevant for 2 expansions now, since the very beginning of WoD, when they actually finished nerfing the hell out of them. Um, but I think that Blizzard started to go away from making it so you're minor or you're micromanaging a lot of things in specs. So that was the biggest gripe that everybody had about demonology, is that, well, every time I summon something, I have to cast something to empower them. Or with Survival Hunter, you had to balance your dots, buff up times, and Mongoose Bite, all while knowing exactly when to pop your cooldowns. It was just too much going on at once, and it became, uh, if you messed up once, it was a huge issue down the road. I think that now, with the changes that they've had to both of those classes, this is no longer a thing, and I think that that's more or less what they're looking to do down the road.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And the other thing I kind of wanted to mention and kind of get your thoughts on this, a lot of what I would say from the negative feedback we're seeing from the community towards the changes we are seeing with BFA is a lot of people are complaining that they're oversimplifying classes. They're gutting too much from the classes. They're taking away from what makes that class feel good, and that could be something like an artifact trait, a talent, moving a spell into the talent tree, moving a talent into the spells, just making changes that kind of take away from what has made the class feel like it is in Legion. But with the exception of Fury Warrior, and we'll certainly talk about that on today's show, I have yet to play a DPS class. And I don't say tank or healer because they're of a different dynamic situation. But from every DPS class I have played, the oversimplifying, quote unquote, as people are complaining about, has felt good to me. Almost every single class I've played, despite their strength or weaknesses DPS wise, has felt fluid for the most part and good, and very little downtime. Obviously there's going to be a few exceptions in there, but for the most part, everything has felt good. Has that been your experience so far, or do you feel differently?
I agree. I think that Blizzard has come to the mentality of, if I'm going to take the time to press this button, it better do something for me.
Mm-hmm.
We see that I'm gonna, I guess, slight spoiler alert. You see that a lot in Fury Warrior. They actually removed Furious Strike as part of the rotation. It's now baked in as a talent with Frenzy. Um, Pretty much, it just felt bad to have that button. It seemed like something you were pressing because you had nothing else to do. And I think that they're coming away from that kind of thing. Um, we've seen it in other specs as well, that they are not so much, this is a button that you push when everything else is down, but this is a button that you're going to press to make your damage, or contribute to your damage as much as the rest of them, really.
Yeah. And I don't. I'm trying to remember. Did they made that change after I played Fury Warrior the first time? Yeah.
Yeah, they've
Okay.
completely overhauled it.
Which
Which will go.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I like I said, I've been out of town this weekend, so my testing has purely been limited to the class I'll be covering today. Or sorry, the spec I'll be covering on today's show. But I'll be excited to get there and test that because I've always liked Fury, especially from a fantasy standpoint. And I'll also mention this in arms. Who doesn't want to play a dual wielding two-handed class? That just seems awesome. Like every kid growing up, like if you were playing around, you're playing, you're LARPing as a child. Nobody wants to be the kid only with one sword. Everybody wants to be the kid with two swords or two axes. Like screw, don't give me a shield. Give me another axe. Give me another shield. I want to be a badass. So from fantasy standpoint, I've always gravitated towards Fury, and I was not a fan of Fury when I tested it a couple weeks ago, before they made the overhaul. And so I have yet to get in there, but I know from talking off the show and what you just said now, I'm excited to get in there and give it a try. But spoiler alert, they're going to really have to do good because I was really enjoying ARMS today. But before we move on, were there any other big notes? I know you said you had a few that you couldn't remember off the top of your head before we hit the record button or live, but I was hopeful maybe you remembered them by now. If not, no big deal. We'll move on. But I just feel like I should give you an opportunity.
I mean, nothing groundbreaking, but I know that right now, as we sit, PTR is live now. That was something that came up last week or the week before. We hadn't discussed anything about that, so that's good news. We're on our way towards our new expansion here right away.
Yeah, man. We are very quickly. We're like what, 3 weeks and a month away from BFA being live. So we're under 10 weeks now.
Yeah,
So it's there. It's close.
yeah, it comes quickly.
Time's gonna fly.
But overall, I don't really think so. I just like you, I really haven't had a lot of time to get in and do anything. So
I will say on a bit of a sour note, one of the guilds that Oreo and I stepped away from because, yeah, they just killed Mythic Argus. That feels good.
well, we were gonna be sitting around watching it anyway. So
Yeah. I just, I've always been a proponent on this show that, we're not experts. We're not these method players that sit up on this high pedestal that, we just press buttons better than people. We're average Joes like every other player in there. So yeah, I felt like, it might be worth saying, this is kind of the reality of just being an average, part of the community, part of the average player base, part of the pitfalls. And this was one of the big motivators for us to start this guild on Horde side and hopefully have this be something that lasts, versus falling apart a year in, 2 months in, 3 months in, 6 months in, whatever the case may be. And as people will obviously come and go, and we can certainly cover this topic on another show, primarily focused at guild longevity. But hopefully, as people come and go, we can continue to do well and fill the ranks and continue to move forward throughout this expansion, and hopefully expansions come. So there's definitely some excitement to be had, and we've already said it once in the show, but we have been working hard, and I say we, it's mostly been Oreo and another officer that have been doing a lot of the work. I've been busy, but hopefully I can step in and start carrying my weight as well. But we're making some strides, I feel like, and I gotta give a big shout out to Silk and Oreo, our two officers who've been tasked with doing the recruitment. So your guys, as you listen to this show moving forward, you're gonna hear a whole lot more guild talk. We're gonna try our hand at tying the podcast and the guild together, kind of mimicking what was kind of Convert to Raid in its earlier stages. But so again, if you guys are interested in any capacity, you'll find our contact info and guild info in the show notes link below. I did want to take a second, since we will only be covering one class on today's show. We will not have our halftime FYI. Just a friendly reminder, guys, like I've said already, we are not experts. We are not theory crafters. We, by no shape or form, advertise as such. And in no shape or form do we desire to be held to such standard. We are average players just like the rest of you. We'd like to think we're really awesome, but truthfully, we're not number one parsers on every fight in Mythic. So if we say something that you disagree with or that is wrong, that has changed, whatever the case may be, we are human. We make mistakes. Anything we do say is not necessarily set in stone. Blizzard is subject to change. Anything that we have said, we've already seen this with past episodes. So we just kind of like the friendly reminder, don't hold us to a flame. We're doing the best we can, and most of what we say today is going to be purely opinion based as we search for our mains for BFA, just like the rest of you. So with that being said, let's get started. I'm going to let Oreo take the reins here on his first one, and we are going to be talking the Protection Warrior. So whenever you're ready, my man, take it away.
Yeah, Protection Warrior. It's similar in Sword and Board as the Protection Paladin. However, I feel that the Prot Warrior is a little bit more of a hard hit tank absorption. Um, that being said, I have played it quite a bit. I actually used it to level for most of it, for most of the grind to 120 using dungeon keys and whatnot. I did find that unless you spec a certain way, it either felt slow or clunky. The clunky comes from having to use devastate in order to kind of fish for shield slam procs. Um, with that being said, their single target strength is very high. Where they really lack, and I mean, this is kind of just a tank thing right now, is in AoE strength, being able to hold threat on that. I found myself taking talents such as Dragon's Roar or the Avatar buffing Thunderclap in order to just even have a hope to have the snap threat to hold mobs on long enough to really do any of the encounters or even trash. Really, they really suffer from ad grabbing. The They have heroic throw, but it doesn't really do enough damage to really piss anything off enough. Really, so you find yourself using taunt a lot, which fortunately, if it's on cooldown and you need it, then it kind of sucks. Um, that being said, they have high mobility and being able to hop around using their leaps and their charges. They have you can talent into double intercept on things, and that tied in with the heroic leap is definitely one of the more mobile classes that you'll see at tank wise. Uh, Taking cooldowns, demo shout, last stand, shield wall. You can use, I believe it's still a thing with last stand if you talent into it it allows you to block all attacks while you have last stand up. So that's kind of a nice little quality of life buff to it if you talent into it. Uh, Demo shout is nice. You can use it also as an offensive cooldown. However, I found that the survivability of protection warriors didn't really allow me with the changes to to their active mitigation and whatnot. I'll touch that in about a few points here. Their utility being Battle Shout. That's pretty much all warriors can bring that. The 10% strength and all this stuff. Um, what I did want to touch about was that shield block does not seem to be a requirement anymore. It's kind of a thing that you're going to be wanting to press only when the big damage comes out. They increase uh, the cooldown between recharges on it. I think it's 20 seconds now. So they're getting away from the ability to keep it up almost at all times. And then the other change is that I don't know if they've really known what they want to do with it is ignore pain. Anybody who played the beginning of Legion knows that ignore pain was like the most overpowered thing ever. The first raid release for Legion was double prot warrior tanks because they could just absorb all the damage and just sit there and spam ignore pain until that happened. Blizzard got a hold of them and then nerfed it. And then really, warriors haven't really been this anywhat competitive since then. Um, so that was something that they really want to look at in this expansion. They definitely wanted to change it, but I don't really know if they're 100% successful with what they wanted to do. Um, they At first they took it away and made it a flat damage percentage. So I think it was a 40% damage reduction for 3 or 4 seconds on like a 15-second cooldown. But then that feels too much like a shield block kind of thing. There's not really any difference between that and shield block being active mitigation, so they actually took it away for a long time, and people were really humming and hawing like, "Ooh, what are they going to replace Ignore Pain with?" And they kind of threw a few bones to us with they had Bolster for a while, and I think they took Bolster away again, and then they reintroduced Ignore Pain, but at a reduced absorption. So it was only 50% absorption of the damage. So it's not something that you're going to be wanting to spam because you'll still be taking damage. It'll just be half of what it is. I believe that they did that just to more make it on a level playing field for taking spell damage as compared to other tanks where you have like blood DKs with their anti magic. Um, monks can purify it, I'm pretty sure. Paladins have the spell warding, just other things, just to have that level playing field of being able to absorb some of that damage. Um, but overall, I felt not great tanking as it. I felt like compared to the other tanks that we've had that we've tested, it just felt like I was just taking so much more damage. Healers were upset that I was tanking for them as a prot warrior, um, and that not feeling great kind of contributes to the fact that I probably wouldn't play it as a main. If that was to be, if I was to go warrior, I would probably go with the other two specs. Uh, yeah, that's Prot Warrior in a nutshell, really. I don't know. You said that you haven't really tested much of it, but I know that you have tried it out on Legion.
Yeah.
So
Firstly, I'd like to say what up to Cake. He's one of our guildies. He's in the chat. He popped in after the show started. So what up, Cake? Secondly, to respond to you, yeah, like you said, I have yet to test it on beta. I still want to, um, for reasons I'll reveal later on. But the general feel with Warrior for me, since Legion has come around, has been that I'm a big fan of how a rotation feels. And one of the things with tanks has always been that I've played DPS for so long, the move towards a class that doesn't really have a rotation, so to speak. And I know one of the arguments could always be had that no class technically has a rotation. They all have priority systems, which is technically true. But at least with those classes, that priority system, once you get gear and stuff like that, tends to fall into a rhythm that feels like a rotation, even if it does have a bit of whack a mole to it. Tanks to me have always just been like, here's 5 or 15 buttons depending on which tank class you're playing. Smash your face into all of them, but here's 4 that you need to press at certain key points, so don't hit those by accident. You know, and Warrior to me just always felt like the on that more extreme spectrum to me, and that could just be something I never spent enough time to get really used to it or whatever. But I've always gravitated, I've always liked the Demon Hunter class feel since it's come about for tanking. I've always liked Paladin. They've been one of my favorites from a tank perspective. Druid has always felt boring to me. And then monks are something I haven't spent a lot of time on. But I have actually been lately, and we'll talk, I'll get to talk about that more once we do that class episode here in a couple of weeks. But I'm with you. Like, a lot of the things I've heard on beta and I watch Preach, I watch a lot of the method videos, and I do my research even if I don't test some of these specs. And Warrior still feels like, from the community's perspective, especially the top end, that Warrior just isn't at that top of the list right now for tanks. Now, I have heard that their survivability individually within their spec is high, but they lack in so much other areas, like you were saying, threat, their AoE tanking, you know, so their DPS is really low. Obviously, when you're in higher end Mythic pluses or a high end rating group, especially from the world first perspective, they're gonna want tank classes that kind of find that balance of really high DPS but decent survivability, because their healers can usually make up for the lack of survivability that you'd see with maybe another class, because they're gonna want to push that DPS as much as possible. So I don't know. I need to get in there and test it, but if I were to play a tank, I highly doubt that I'd play Warrior based on what I do know currently. So the one thing I did want to ask you though before we move on is, I can see where you would not want to play a Warrior right now on its current state with beta in a Mythic Plus setting, but could you see their viability in a raid setting with having another tank or two present to basically pick up the slack of where they are lacking?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe this is throwing Warriors kind of back to the old school what they were. They were always the main tank. They took the brunt of the damage from the raid boss, and you always had another class or another tank class that would kind of pick up ads or pick up or do mechanics and stuff like that. So maybe this is something that they're looking towards doing again, having them be able to take large hits very well. Uh, I would say yes, because I've also seen with at least the rating that they have released, uh, there's not like a necessity that you have to hold a group on you as a tank. You can have one or two or three of a group on you, and it's not a huge deal. So as long as you are doing the boss swaps properly, that would probably be the biggest, most important part.
Yeah. So what you're really telling me, what I'm really gathering out of everything you said so far, is that if I want to get out of trash, I should just play a Prot Warrior and tank.
Pretty much, you can go AFK. Nobody's gonna know the difference.
It used to be I could be Loot Master, but that's going away. So, all right, cool. Well, like I said, I'll have to get in there and do some Prot Warrior testing. I was having too much fun with Arms Warrior today. But speaking of arms, let's roll into that because I'm kind of excited. This class has really piqued my interest. Like I said, I can't say it enough. I was having a ton of fun. It's a really good class from a feel standpoint. So let's talk Arms Warrior, guys. This class, to me, the best way to describe it from a class description is Babe Ruth. It's not a fast play class. Like Babe Ruth was never going to be the fastest guy to the base, but it didn't matter because when he did hit it, he's going to hit the shit out of it. And he could take his time, So a lot of the stuff that I was doing with the Arms Warrior just felt super hard hitting and nowhere close to the speed I was feeling with the Fury Warrior or some other classes in the game. So that from that perspective, plus the sound effects, I don't know, it was really cool. So DPS Arms, it's a melee class. From the DPS style, it's a builder spender with rage, and you end up dumping that rage with hard hitting spells like Slam and Mortal Strike. So single target strength, this class was high. It has a little bit of ramp time, but even with, like, I know when I was watching the Daily Preach video that you were telling me about, Oreo, when he was doing arms, he was talking about in some of the dungeon settings when you can't really allow some of your mid-range cooldowns like Colossus Smash reset, you could feel very weak on some of the trash pulls in between your cooldowns. I didn't find that at all. I found that I was in there with an Elemental Shaman, a DPS Demon Hunter, and a Disc Priest for a healer. And then what did we have? We ended up having two different tanks. It didn't really matter. But every now and then the Demon Hunter would burst higher than me. And the Elemental Shaman would burst higher than me for like half a second. And then I would just blow him out. So maybe the other people I was playing with were not the greatest. But I found very little time, even with my cooldowns down, that I was getting like a wet noodle. So I've got single target strength here as high, maybe a little bit of ramp time, but AoE strength, like I said, they can be high. It's a little bit on the bursty side if they can't get their Colossus Smash or what is the other War Strike, Warhammer, right? War Breaker, sorry. If they can't get those down to pair with their Blade Storm, their DPS will be a little bit lower, but it's still pretty high from bursty standpoint. Their target swapping I have listed as medium to high. I say medium because they do have a dot they'd like to get rolling, but I say high as well because they do have the ability to leap and or charge over, so that ramp time can be negated with the fact that they can get there super quick. Their DPS cooldowns are, their mobility obviously is high, like I've said, with leap and charge. Their DPS cooldowns right now are Colossus Smash, which is on a 45-second cooldown, or Warbreaker if you talent into it. Both basically give you a 30% damage increase for 10 seconds. One of them does just on the target you're targeting. The other one is from an AoE perspective, which is nice. Plus, the Warbreaker, the AoE one, also lowers the armor of the targets, right? I think was the tooltip, which is really nice because you're physical DPS, even though your bleed ignores armor. So that part is nice. And the other cooldown you can talent into is Avatar. I was doing some playing around with that. I In a very short period of time, Avatar was great. I did increase numbers, but the longer I played it out, like a 5+ minute fight, Avatar didn't really seem to change my overall DPS. So I don't really know. I'll have to see once people have more gear how much of a difference that makes. So for the utility, you have fear stuns and obviously battle shout. So that take it or leave it. They're not going to be your higher desired classes for the utility. Their survivability though is great. They have decent self healing. They're plate wearers. They have die by the sword. The only time I was really in threat of dying was when I had my what's the self healing spell, Oreo? I cannot remember the name of it.
Do you mean Second Wind?
Sure. You can also talent into the instant cast one that hits right away. They ba-
Oh, Impending Victory.
right.
That's the one.
Yep. They do the both. They both do the same thing. You hit the target, it heals you for a percentage. They were nice. So the only time I ever found myself in threat of dying, whether it be out questing or in a dungeon, was when I had already used that or was just being dumb and not hitting my buttons. I was weaving. If you weave in fear, stuns, and stuff like that with everything else, like their survivability is kind of nutty. It was fun. It was a nice change of pace. So for their general feel, I have listed as very fluid to the Legion iteration, the whack a mole, but in a fluid way. And there's always something to press. Arms in the past has always felt like you'd vomit all your damage in these windows, and then you'd kind of sit there, and then you do it all over again. And while in theory that is still the case, this class it did never felt that way. It always felt like I always had something to do, but I could still set up for those windows and not feel like I'm dropping way off in between them. So for me, right now, my likelihood to be a main is medium well to well done. I always use stake as my way of labeling my classes. It is a very, very fun class to play. And just kind of a side note, I've never been attracted to arms. I said this at the beginning of the show. Who doesn't want to do wield two-handers? I've always felt arms was more ebb and flow, but little did I know how much fun this class or spec actually is. So I can't say it enough. I know Preach says the same thing right now. You might have a new arms fanboy in me. Just saying. But before we move on to the last warrior spec, I felt like I should give you an opportunity to say any thoughts you've had on the spec.
I've been kind of while we were waiting to get this going, I was trying arms a little bit. Um, I think that you're right because, uh, as a few of you know, I have played arms for one of our other guilds there when we were in Tumas Argaris. Um, it felt that every minute you did all your damage, and that was kind of the issue that I had with both of the warrior specs, is that you are really good off the start, and then you nosedive because everybody else who's doing consistent damage will just outpace you every single time. And it feels bad that you have to get the most out of that 8 second window in order to do well.
Yeah, so before, I mean, without giving away too much, because I know we've yet to talk Fury. This was a question I'd kind of mentally jotted down. I wanted to ask you. Typically speaking, inside of each expansion, from a historical average standpoint, Arms has always performed better at the beginning, and Fury is always ramped up towards the end as they've gotten more gear because they've been more stat dependent. Are we going to see that same thing with inside of BFA? And if so, how soon do you think we see the flop of Fury overtaking Arms? Or do we not see that? Do we see the more fight situation,
I actually think that because going into this expansion, we're not looking at tier sets, we're not looking at legendaries, we're not looking at artifact weapons anymore. And it's going to be very easy to balance off of the handful of the handful of gear that people are going to be obtaining. I think that we're going to see it that um, Arms will excel at burst AoE, whereas Fury will excel at sustained AoE, just based off of the way that those classes
Mm-hmm.
play. But I feel that they will overall that will be kind of the thing back and forth between them.
So do you think it viable to say if you are going to play a DPS warrior, especially from a progression standpoint, that it might be in your best interest to be able to play both and you could switch back and forth depending on the fight? Like obviously if you have a fight where you have periodic ads popping up that need to be bursted down super quick, maybe arms is your better choice. Maybe if you have a heavier cleave fight, 2-3 bosses up or a lot of ads all the time, maybe Fury is the better choice. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating here. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts?
And I think that that's probably going to continue to be the plan. Um, we're also looking at the fact that with the way that like Warbreaker and whatnot works for arms is you're doing that AoE Colossus Smash, which is ultimately your nice big burst AoE because you can chain that into a Blade Storm and there comes your burst AoE right there. Um, but we'll also see. I think that arms is going to be the cleave spec to have for melee, just based off of how sweeping strikes is going to be. It's kind of a mini cooldown as well. It's not something that you just press and forget. So, um, that being said, I think that they're going to be the cleave and burst AoE kings. And I think that if you're going to start seeing sustained AoE or um, sustained single target, not so much burst, I think that you're going to see more people go towards Fury.
You think so?
Yeah.
Cool. And the other thing I want to talk about, we'll talk about after we talk Fury. But I think the execute windows may be a little different for those two specs. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I think you can talent into changing it.
Okay. Well, we'll
But
save that because I think there are some differences for those two specs when it comes to execute windows. So, but that being said, let's go ahead and round out the Warrior Talk with Fury, and then we'll bullshit some more, so to speak, at the end.
yeah, so Fury Warrior is the go-to rampaging berserker class of World of Warcraft. You are grabbing two of the biggest weapons you have, and you're smashing things with it. Uh, so it is a melee DPS. It is quick and spammy, but I also found it very fluid as well. They have very high single target strength. Their cleave is where they kind of lack, as we were talking about earlier. Arms being very good at it. But if we're doing talents or target swapping, sorry, I find that they don't have any bleeds. They don't have anything to set up as much as say a arms warrior where you want to get your Colossus smash up on something. Uh, Fury could just hop right over there, get going at it. Um, AoE strength with the way that they have redone the class. So I guess I'll go a little in depth with it. So Furious Slash is now baked into Frenzy, as you're going to be using that. Um, Whirlwind is going to be your new filler for Fury, pretty much, if you aren't talented into that. And I mean, we could talk about all day about having AoE baked into your single target as a DPS. It eliminates that choice, and some people don't like that. But I kind of liked it because if you have the two or three NPCs that you're fighting, you're able to use at least a little bit of cleave up, and the way that was it called, meat cleaver, I believe it's called,
hmm
is the buff it gives you, where you can use your raging blow and your rampages on on up to 4 targets. I
So
think when you whirlwind.
just to clarify real quick, normally I'm not a fan of jumping in when you guys are talking the specs, but and I actually meant to bring this up earlier, but I kind of wanted to wait. But I think you segue nicely here. Is if I understanding you correctly, you're talking about the weird situation where some classes, even with a couple of different mobs present, you still don't want to switch over from your single target rotation to your AoE rotation, correct?
For Fury, it's kind of one and the same because of how they've
Right.
because how it was before is that you're using Furious Slash as a filler. Now with the way that um, going through your rotation now has a percent chance to enrage you instead of having that awkward having to crit thing, um, which in Legion, if you're familiar with Fury, where you had to crit on your Bloodthirst in order to proc your Enrage,
Mm-hmm.
or you had to Rampage, right? So it was one or the other in order to get your Enrage up. And that was kind of the awkward thing, was that you had to crit. Furious Slash was built into the spec then as that bad luck protection to help you crit. Now with that gone, and it's now a percent chance, um, your rotation is now going to look like Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, Whirlwind. Kind of not that exact priority, but those are going to be the 3 buttons you're going to want to press. Um, and that, I know people are, I shouldn't say people, but I know that there's been an issue in the past with certain classes having their AoE built into the same rotation. They don't feel like they have to make that choice. You know, some people don't like it, some people like it. I kind of liked it for Warrior because it felt like no matter what, I was always doing the right thing. It wasn't as unforgiving as the class is on live. Um, Current Legion, I've got like a 950, 960 Warrior, Fury Warrior right now. If you do not execute your battle cry window 100% perfectly, you're gonna be like scraping the bottom of the meter pretty much. And the way that they've changed this class now is that it's now a fluid. Well, I wrote down here, fluid doesn't feel like do damage every 30 to 40 seconds in a class. It feels like you are consistently pushing damage. No matter what button you're pushing, you are doing good damage. Um, Going through this as well, they've changed it. So now recklessness is back for all of those people who have remembered recklessness from way back. I think they got rid of it. Warlords, was it?
I don't remember.
It was, I just remember it being an hour-long cooldown in vanilla. That's all I remember it as. It was the button that you pushed once, and then you forgot about it because it was an hour before you could push it again. But
Wait, I think recklessness was present in Warlord, so if it disappeared at all, it was prior to that.
okay, then maybe it was, yeah, I'll have to look into it further. But using recklessness now, uh, they've changed it. So battle cry is morphed into recklessness, and recklessness now increases your critical strike chance by, I think it's 20%, but then also it increases your rage generation for that window of time. And that, what that means is you are basically going to be in that window, you're going to be hitting your raging blows as often as they come off cooldown. You're going to be hitting buttons, and you're going to be seeing numbers just flying across your screen super quickly. Um, that will be basically your damage window. It's no longer going to be your burst window, which I liked. Um, Not having to be like, oh, battle cries up. Okay, now I got to get avatar up. Now I got to do all this stuff. It's pretty much I push this button, and now I'm getting into rampage, which is now the core of the damage on this spec. I know that for the longest time it kind of flip flopped. Back in Nighthold, Raging Blow is the huge damage part of the build. Uh, then with the changes that the class got, of course, interacting with certain legendaries, Rampage kind of came and went as the core part of the spec, but it's definitely where they want it to be right now, being the most important part of the spec. You are building solely for that until you get to the execute window, which execute has been changed for Fury. Now this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. For arms, execute is when you hit a percentage of health. I think it's 20. You can talent into 35. You're gonna hit this button, and that's basically all you're gonna want to spam as an arms warrior to get that execute range damage out. Now for Fury, they've changed it that it's a rage builder now. It's on a 6-second cooldown, reduced by haste. Um, so it makes, it was always kind of an awkward thing whenever you were a Fury Warrior getting down around the execute phase, is you always had two rage spenders that you wanted to balance. You wanted to have your rampage, but you also wanted to have your execute. And now they've pretty much gotten rid of that because execute is now on a cooldown. it generates rage, and you're going to be using it, weaving it back and forth with rampage. So I like that change. I'm sure quite a few other warriors will agree with me. It was always super awkward to have to choose between the two. Um, of course, going into artifacts, having to maintain the execute buff uptime and all that kind of stuff really did not feel well. Utility wise, they have battle shout. I'm trying to think. I don't think that they have. They have probably have Stormbolt, but I don't think that they have Shockwave anymore. I'll have to take a look at that later. But their survivability is very good because of the way Bloodthirst works. It's a self heal. You're going to be using it in your rotation anyways. They've also changed Fury that when you enrage, you no longer take more. You no longer take more damage. You just will always just flat take the regular amount of damage that you should have always. It always was a confusing thing when they were designing this spec in the beginning, and they said, well, when you're enraged, you're going to take more damage. But don't worry, we'll give you more health to offset the fact you're taking more damage. It was very kind of confusing design in my opinion. Um, yeah, just pretty much the likelihood for a main. I would say it's medium. Like I said, if I was going to pick between, if I had to be a warrior, I definitely probably wouldn't tank as one just on that feel. For DPS wise, I think that Fury would be probably the way to go for me. I always just kind of enjoyed the slamming two weapons around, um, that kind of feel. So yeah,
Well, I'll have to give the new Fury a try. You know, obviously I tried it a couple weeks ago, and it just felt like I'm generally a fan of whack a mole, but I'm that past iteration was it just didn't feel good. So hopefully, you know, it does feel fluid, like you say now to me, and I'll have to give it a try. But that was I did like the fact that you touched on the execute stuff because to me, I kind of imagine how classes are going to be used from a progressional standpoint. You know, um, obviously inside of fights, if you have a heavy necessity for execute windows, you're going to bring classes that have increased damage in execute windows. Warriors, yada yada yada, etc. In Legion, we saw some Shadow Priest play with Surrender Madness to get through execute windows. Some other classes as well. Sometimes you'll sacrifice class single target strength if you have heavy AoE needs to fight you need to push past. It just depends. And so for me, when I think about Arms versus Fury, with the execute differences, I feel like Arms is going to shine much heavier in an execute windows than Fury will. You know, because they still have the ability to spam executes. You know, and so I was kind of paying attention to my damage meters when I was doing the dummies, when I was in dungeons, and I was noticing that if I didn't worry about Mortal Strike or any of that kind of stuff, and I just literally did overpower executes, you know, essentially only using overpower when I was out of rage, but then making sure to press Colossus Smash or Warbreaker depending on if I talented or not. And I seemed to have more DPS in execute windows when I was just primarily just make sure you have rage and dump your executes, and then obviously hit Colossus Smash or Warbreaker when it comes off cooldown. So I could totally see where Arms Warrior is gonna shine in the execute windows. So
well, especially since Fury will no longer be that same way. It's going to be now used as a builder. I think it's got a 6-second cooldown. You're not going to be smashing that button. It's not going to be the old-fashioned warrior. Okay, it's hit 20%. Now let me just hit this button over and over and over and over and over again.
yeah. So I mean, it feels so weird to me. Blizzard always says that we want to design classes so you don't feel like you have to change your talents, that you don't feel like you have to switch specs, that you don't feel like you have to switch gear out. I know in BFA they're moving towards a system both in raids and in Mythic Pluses to where you will not be able to change your gear out. You know, especially in Mythic. That's a bigger change from Mythic Plus because in raids, as long as you drop combat, you can switch your gear. But in Mythic Pluses, the entire Mythic Plus, because on a timer, is considered a fight, and so you have the inability to swap your gear out now. which is going to force players to, like right now, even though I can't change my talents, so let's step outside of the dungeon. On my shaman, I can, even though I'm running single target spec for LE, I can swap into my AoE gear and legendaries and still just destroy the meters on AoE situations.
Yeah.
So, but when you have these differences in the specs, even with inside of a class, I'm still seeing situations in my head where you're going to want to bring an Arms Warrior or a Fury Warrior. You're going to want your players to have the ability and desire a willingness to make those swaps, to change those talents. I mean, is it just me or does Blizzard not understand if you give players the opportunity, they are going to max min, whether that's a max min from a 10% swing or a 0.07% swing. You know what I mean?
Well, I think we even see that currently with the way that pure damage specs are
Mm-hmm.
uh, going through Tomb. It was primarily Destruction Warlocks being kind of one of the big ones for damage. And then as soon as Taurus was a thing, you definitely saw that big shift towards Affliction because you were able to min max. You had a lot of ads to dot and all that stuff. It was very hard to min max that as a Destruction Warlock, but or no, I shouldn't say very easy, but easier as an Affliction Warlock to do that. Same with the reason why we saw a lot of shift from Frost to Fire that same window as well. You still see the odd Arcane Mage. Not sure how that works,
I feel like we're
but
going to see more.
yeah, I'm definitely feeling that as well, especially with the way that the AOE is going for a lot of classes.
So let me ask you this, and I've been kind of wondering this question in my own head so far. A lot of the speculation that is coming out of content creators, whether it be YouTubers, podcasters like us, or whatever, a lot of that information really feels like it's based off of people's experiences inside of 5-man settings, right?
Yep, yeah, because the only way to experience raiding right now is to have your pre-made group ready to go.
And even with that, how much of that is viable data? Because I feel like even from that perspective, we're still lacking a lot of the pieces to make an accurate guess or speculation, so to speak, based on that.
And that's part of it too. Is we saw a lot when they were doing heroic and mythic raid testing. We saw a lot of the guild just hugging people just to get the warm bodies and just to be able to
Mm-hmm.
see the fights and whatnot. I think that everybody knows that all of the real fine tuning and everything that like the small adjustments to the fight are going to be all internal things from Blizzard. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're not really going to be looking for feedback whether this thing should hit for 50,000 damage or should this thing hit for 45,000 damage. That's not something that they're looking at. They're wondering how does the fight feel really, and that's the only feedback that players can really give.
Right. Well, and the reason I asked is I kind of wanted to make a point that right now for me, and I feel like this, you tell me whether you feel this is an accurate statement or not, but right now for me, I feel like a lot of the information I'm getting is better put towards making a decision if I were purely looking at Mythic Plus, right?
Yeah, that's even when we're looking at healers, we're looking at tanks, we're looking at any kind of DPS really. Um, that will be a thing, right? We've the majority of our experience has been becoming from dungeon runs, leveling, things like that, where you are looking at your own survivability, your ability to level, your, I guess, how you interact in a group setting of 5 people. Now, rating is a little bit different. You obviously are going to have a higher amount of players in there, but there's also going to be a lot more things going on. In a 5-man, you might have a mechanic that only targets one person. But in a raid, you're going to have a mechanic that targets multiple people, and how those people react or interact is going to determine the fight. I also feel that in a dungeon, there's a lot more forgiveness. If one player goes down, it's not like, oh, that's it. We got to start all over again. But you definitely see in raids with these things having rage timers or having, I guess, the big damage bosses, right? The ones that you want to be pushing all the DPS that you can. We saw that with like Agrimar and stuff like that in this expansion. If they continue that way, it's going to be interesting to see what classes can keep up that high damage. I think we're going to be seeing classes that do well in dungeons, not do so well in raids in that aspect.
I'm just now realizing I'm gonna admit my own fault that I never changed the Twitch title, so people think we're still talking Death Knights 2 episodes ago. My apologies to anybody joining that may have joined based upon that title.
I saw that. I didn't want to say anything.
Well, again, this validates my point that I'm not a professional. So apologies, but yeah, no, I have to say I'd agree with everything you just said there. And I kind of wanted to ask these questions and bring these conversations up to elicit, I guess, to further my point earlier that a lot of this information, I know a lot of people are super hungry to get the definitive so that they can make their class main decisions. And I gotta say, from any of the content creators I've seen trying to cover this stuff so far, I have to give the biggest applause to Preach because he does a really good job of making it a point to let it be known that he is purely making his decision based on what he enjoys, you know. And then obviously, he can pick, he can, let's say he hypothetically says, okay, I'm going to play one of these 3 classes. Obviously, this class is my top choice, but if the guild needs say otherwise, I can play one of these other 2, and still be happy. But that's obviously going to change from each person based on your guild situation, whether you're a mythic raider, heroic, normal, casual, whatever. If you're just an LFR hero, if you're just into doing pet battles and world quests, um, I'd say no matter what situation you are in, my biggest suggestion I can make to anybody, especially right now, stop worrying about the definitives. You're not going to get them. In order for the theory crafters to give you the information you're looking for, they have to have the information themselves, and they don't quite have the necessary information to give you representative data that you're going to need, that they're going to need, that anybody's going to need for that matter. So I just kind of wanted to close today's show out with just be patient, guys. Primarily focus on what you enjoy, because that's what we're doing here on this show. Obviously, off the air, inside of our guild, we're having our conversations are a little bit different, but they're still, the biggest things I always tell the guys in TRC, in the guild, play what you're gonna be happy with. I don't want to see people playing a class that they're not necessarily happy with, but they're doing it primarily for the guild needs, and then 3 months down the road they're gonna burn out and or want to switch their mains, and then we gotta wait for somebody to re-gear a platoon, potentially leave somebody behind. Find some classes that you enjoy, and then we'll work from there. Obviously, I for me personally, I always pick 3 classes, and then I'll pick of those 3 based on what's going to fit the best needs for a guild. And I'm going to really try to not do what I did in Legion and switch my freaking main every single tier.
That's you and me both.
Oh my gosh, that was, I liked it at the time. I'm glad I did it, but God, I wish I don't ever have to do that again.
Yeah.
I don't have that time anymore, man.
No, exactly. Especially with the fact that we're going to be more in a leadership position as well. But I also would like to go a little bit more into what you're talking about, how
Sure.
people are looking for that answer. What do I want to play? Or what do you recommend that I play? And I was browsing things a little while ago, and Icy Veins had posted up their talent guides and all that stuff. All their theory crafters have posted guides up about
Or BFA? Okay.
yeah, and people were upset that they had not done this is the talent you're going to want to choose thing, right? People are going, well, if I'm going to read this guide, I want to know what to pick. And honestly, the thing is that you can't make that choice quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
What will be good one week can be tuned to half of that the next week, or it could be buffed, or they could completely remove it. We don't know.
Right. Fight styles could change that. The Azerite armor could change that. Stat dependency could change that. Is Blizzard going to tweak how much you get per point of secondary. You know, we saw that with Fire Mage at the beginning of the Legion. They lowered in order to try and bring secondary stats down and item level up. There's a lot of factors that go into this. Patience is a virtue. Try and have it. I myself am not a patient man, so I get it, which is why I'm standing here telling you, try and be patient. The time is very close at hand. I know a lot of you guys are itching to get that character geared up, get him ready to go. But the other side of that coin is, like, I know having legendaries and an 8 or 975 shaman like I do would be great to level with because I won't need gear until, 115, 116.
Yep.
But does it really matter when the average time is 10 hours of playtime to get from 110 to 120 or whatever it's going to be? Like, it's, okay, so you have 4 hours of playtime. That might be slightly miserable until everybody else is on the same page as you. It doesn't really matter. The end goal should be, at least for those of us here on the show, and I would like to believe most people watching and or listening to the show, the whole goal is to get to end game and focus on that. So I think Oreo's right. I think Preach is getting it right. I think a lot of the other content creators are getting it right. Not to say that they weren't. I just like the way Preach does his a little bit better. But just be patient, guys. So, anyways, before we get out of here, did you have anything else you wanted to add today?
Nope. No, I think we've pretty much touched on what we wanted to.
Okay. Cool. Well, just to say it again, guys, we are starting a guild. We have 20 people on the roster. That's not to say we're closing the roster out at 20. People are going to have, needs to step away. Obviously, we're not going to step into Mythic right away. We're going to step into normal heroic. And we are always welcoming people, be it fun or progressional. We have spots. So if you're interested or if you just want to talk to us, we will link everything in the show notes. I'm pointing for those of you not watching the video version down below. So anyways, that's going to do it for us, guys. Thank you very much for stopping by. Cake, what up, my man? Thanks for stopping in. Any of the others that stopped in on chat today, thank you. I saw you guys pop in and out. And you guys are appreciated. So anyways, we will talk to you guys next week. Oreo will not be with us, but Marty will, and we will be talking shamans. Get ready. We're getting close to saying what our mains will be. Talk to you next week, guys. See ya. You guys want to find Marty, you can find him over at the Blizzard podcast he does, where they talk all things Blizzard games, the Blue Recluse. If you want to find him on Twitter, you can find him at Unamathil. For me, guys, if you want to find me and personally, you can find me over on my Twitch and Twitter, which are both at Mega Irish Gaming, or you can find me on my All Things Blizzard podcast, which I do with my good friend Dusty Porter, the Blizzard Umbrella. If you want to find us here on the show, you can find us at our Twitter account, which is at _TRC podcast, or you can find us on our email, theraidersconfessional@gmail.com, no apostrophe on the S. That being said, guys, Dusty, take us out of here, my man. See ya.
Sorry, I died. Was I supposed to stand in the green puddles or the orange ones?
Hey, get together over there, bud.
This show has been hosted by Dragon Powered Studios, and the intro and outro has been brought to you by Thankful Cow Solutions.
Moo.